started with a missing woman in a quiet Wisconsin town. A small-town hardware store sat empty, the register open, and one piece of paper left on the counter, a sales receipt with a single name on it. Police thought it was nothing more than a lead, but that receipt would lead them to a farmhouse hiding one of the darkest secrets in American history. Plainfield, Wisconsin, population barely 800. A place where everyone knew each other's name, and nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. Winters were long, the fields endless, and life moved at the same quiet pace year after year. Among the locals was a man named Ed Gein, a shy, soft-spoken farmer who did odd jobs around town. He helped neighbors, kept to himself, and most people thought of him as harmless. He lived alone on a rundown farm at the edge of the woods, a house so remote that even the mailman rarely stopped by. To anyone in Plainfield, Ed was just another face in the crowd. No one imagined that behind those faded walls, something far darker was waiting to be found. November 16, 1957. The morning in Plainfield, Wisconsin was quiet, cold, and still, just another Saturday. Bernice Warden, owner of the town's small hardware store, opened as she always did. She was well-liked, known for her kindness and her habit of keeping handwritten notes for every sale. By midday, the main street was nearly empty. The first snow of winter had begun to fall, covering tire tracks and muting every sound. When Bernice's truck was later seen leaving town, no one thought much of it. People often ran errands out on the county roads. But that evening, when her son, Deputy Frank Warden, drove by the shop, the lights were still on. Inside, the register drawer hung open, a few coins scattered across the counter. There was no sign of Bernice. He called for backup, and officers began searching the store. Near the register, they found something small, almost unremarkable. A sales receipt written that morning for a single item, antifreeze. The buyer's name was neatly printed in Bernice's handwriting, Ed Gein. To the local police, it was just a name, one they all recognized. Ed was odd but harmless, the quiet man who lived alone on his family's farm. Still, the receipt placed him as the last person to see Bernice Warden alive. Investigators drove through the falling snow toward Gein's property, a weather-worn farmhouse sitting in total darkness. The yard was overgrown, the outbuildings sagging with age. There were no footprints leading in or out, only the wind brushing across frozen ground. When they knocked, no one answered. A deputy circled to the back door, finding it locked. Through a dusty window, his flashlight cut through the blackness, and what he saw made him call for the others. Within hours, the quietest man in Plainfield would become the center of one of the most disturbing investigations in American history. And it had all begun with that single receipt, an ordinary piece of paper that pointed straight to the unimaginable. By the time officers reached Ed Gein's farmhouse, night had swallowed the fields. The wind cut across the snow, and the only light came from their flashlights sweeping through the dark. The house stood silent, windows coated in dust, like it had been abandoned for years. Sheriff Art Schley forced open the back door. The stench hit first, damp, decay, neglect. Inside, piles of newspapers and broken furniture filled every corner. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves had absorbed years of something unspeakable. At first glance, it seemed like the home of a recluse. But then the deputies began to notice details. Objects that shouldn't exist, shapes that made no sense. And in one back room, their flashlights froze. They had found Bernice Warden, the missing woman from the hardware store. The name on the antifreeze receipt was here. The scene before them defied belief. It was the kind of discovery that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They called for reinforcements, sealing off the property as word spread through Plainfield. The quiet farmer everyone thought they knew had been hiding something unimaginable just beyond town. Outside, snow continued to fall over the empty fields. The investigation had only begun, but one thing was certain. That single sales receipt had led them straight into the heart of a nightmare. In the days after Ed Gein's arrest, investigators tried to understand how a quiet farmer from Plainfield could be capable of such darkness. They learned that Gein had grown up under the rule of a strict and fanatical mother. She preached that the world was wicked and that women were the root of all sin. She kept him isolated from the rest of the town, teaching him to fear everyone except her. When she died, something inside him broke. He sealed off the rooms she had once lived in and let the rest of the house rot. Alone on that barren farm, Gein drifted between grief, obsession, and delusion. He began visiting local cemeteries at night, digging through memories of the only person he had ever loved. To neighbors, he was still the quiet man who helped with chores and odd jobs. No one questioned the lonely figure who stopped by for coffee or borrowed tools. But behind the locked doors of his farmhouse, his loneliness had turned into something monstrous, a private world where he tried to bring pieces of the past back to life. Psychiatrists later described him as a man lost inside his own fantasies, unable to tell life from death, guilt from devotion. His crimes were not driven by greed or anger, but by a fractured mind that confused love with possession. The truth was simple and chilling. Plainfield hadn't created a monster, it had ignored one. And all it took to expose him was a single receipt left on a counter in a small-town store. In the days after Ed Gein's arrest, the quiet town of Plainfield found itself at the center of national attention. Reporters filled the frozen streets, searching for an answer to one haunting question: how could this happen here? Neighbors who once waved to Gein now bolted their doors. Farmers slept with rifles nearby. The sense of safety that once defined Plainfield was gone overnight. Gein confessed, but his calm, matter-of-fact tone unnerved investigators. Psychiatrists soon declared him legally insane, a man detached from reality, polite and mild, yet utterly unaware of the horror he'd created. In 1958, he was sent to a state hospital, where he would spend the rest of his life. The details of his crimes would echo far beyond Wisconsin. They inspired some of Hollywood's darkest creations: Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. Each one a shadow of the man from Plainfield. But beyond the movies and myths lay a truth far simpler and far more unsettling. Evil hadn't crept in from outside. It had lived quietly among them. A single receipt, handwritten in a small-town hardware store, had torn open the illusion of normal life and revealed the darkness hiding behind it. Because sometimes, true horror doesn't lurk in the shadows. It lives right next door, in the people we think we know. Do you think the people of Plainfield could have stopped Ed Gein sooner? Or was he always destined to be discovered this way? Share your thoughts below in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime mysteries. We'll see you with the next case.